How many hours and years of our lives do we spend on work? For nearly all of us, we spend 30 plus years and 1/3 of our days in our vocation. More time perhaps than we spend at rest or at play. But this isn't a problem. Why? Because work is good. Work needs to be integrated deeply into our lives and must be in line with our most important goals and values. And if it is, we have a far more complete and fulfilling life experience. Welcome to the How People Work podcast, where we explore the intersection of how humans think and act and how they apply themselves to their work. When you understand both of these things, you'll be equipped to be insightful, compassionate, and compelling leaders. Welcome back to How People Work. This is co-host Jordan P. sitting here with co-host Jason Murray.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
I almost said good morning.
Good morning. It's late in the evening,
good
actually.
Morning.
It's about, just so you guys know, it's about 10 p.m. I think we've said this on a previous episode at some point, but you and I, we work a full day. We go home. We have dinner with our families. We get the kids to bed. We come back. Actually, today we came back a little early. Yeah. But typically we get started around 8:30 at night. And so it is very much the evening when we're recording this. We're digging back into some of the survey data that Jason and his team has aggregated, and we're going to talk about data today, using data to really kind of crystallize for executives the need to prioritize people and why that's important and some of those things. Because as we look at our survey and we see some of these responses and struggles for HR people, a lot of them come back to the same themes. I'm having trouble creating a positive and satisfying employee experience. I'm having trouble communicating the value of people programs. I'm having trouble getting the tools and budget that I need to support employee well-being. I'm having trouble aligning people programs with business objectives. All of that comes down to kind of a lack of selling well, and that's the job of a lot of people that work kind of directly beneath the C-suite. Is you got to go sell the C-suite. Mm-hmm. Here's what I need. Here's why I need it. And here's why this is going to get us to the goals that you have set for us. So Jason, talk to us about data and what you learned through your surveying that, is a struggle for HR folks when it comes to working with that data.
Sorry, I was like almost giggling while you were because
why are you giggling?
You said like,
what did I say?
The data, our survey data about data.
I said data a lot.
Well, it was just like an inception moment. I was like, whoa, the data from the survey revealed stuff about data, and it just like kind of tripped me up for a second.
I saw that. I saw it in your face.
I was like, wow.
I completely forgot what the word of the day is. You should remind me before we jump in.
Ooh, yes. The word of the day is assuage.
Assuage. Yeah, I would have just completely blanked on that.
Yeah.
All right. So data.
Yes. Well, yeah. I think what you said is on point, right? There's this gap that exists where it's obvious from conversations that we've had with many, many, many HR professionals over the years, so not just in the context of this survey and the interviews that we did, but also just, conversations over the years with advisors and many other people where it's apparent that there's a gap between people who, let's say, represent human needs in the organization and executives that are having to make business decisions.
All of whom say they want to make data-driven decisions. Like that is the biggest buzzword of the past 5-10 years is we are a data-driven organization. Yeah. Right. But does that really just translate to we capture a bunch of data?
I think it's true. I think executives do in fact desire to and often make their decisions based on data.
Okay.
But the problem that I think many HR teams face is, do they actually have the necessary data?
Right.
Can they surface the insights needed that are compelling from that data? And then can they communicate that in a way to executive teams where that insight is tied to the business needs of the organization? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where there becomes a disconnect is, and we got to think about this in terms of the size of the organizations that HR people are working in. And so it's actually really interesting because so typically what you find is at many smaller companies, let's say companies under 250 employees, a lot of times the first HR professionals aren't HR trained, meaning that they were often in administrative function previously, and they get moved into an HR profession, an HR specific type role at that juncture. So I was actually talking with a potential partner that we're having conversations with right now, and they're literally about 300 employees. And we were talking about this very thing, and I was describing to them like, hey, here's how HR people like this. Here's how this tends to operate in their world, because they sell a product that's direct to consumer. They're starting to explore B2B, selling into HR and businesses. And so I kind of brought up this example, and the CEO that we were speaking with of this 300 employee company was like, oh my gosh, that's literally what we just did. We just took somebody who is like, basically an executive assistant and put her into an HR role.
Because we figure she can handle details and she won't let balls fall through the cracks and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And so there's nothing wrong with that inherently, but what it means is, what does that person probably not have experience with? Well, they may not have experience with, really strategic operational business needs of the organization and a familiarity with those kinds of things.
And pairing people objectives with those
and they likely don't have a ton of experience with just working with data. Period.
You always hear from HR people that like, hey, when we sit around the table and I'm talking to the C-suite, the sales leader always wins. The sales leader is like, hey, I need budget, and here's why. And they have this great argument and presentation that's data-driven, but also anecdotal and well conceived and communicated. And the HR person is like, crap. Like I can't compete with their pitch.
And so I mean there's some stuff like that I think is true about it. It's like how like compelling of a story can you formulate to like make an argument and so forth. And there's like really practical things like how comfortable am I working with numbers in a spreadsheet? And I think that's true. Like there's just a lot of
very
people,
basic way to put it, but that's
companies
true.
That aren't comfortable with that. But how are you going to work with employee or people data if you're not comfortable working with spreadsheets, right? It's like there's just kind of an inherent problem there. Actually, a really good example. I've been talking to my brother recently who happens to work in HR at a company that's about 500 employees. And I was just kind of mentioning some of this stuff that like I've been thinking about, from the survey with like people, data, analytics, that kind of stuff. And he's like, yeah, it's really crazy because, his company, 500 employees, one, they don't have anybody who's in charge of any analytics.
Okay.
They do have an HRIS system, so they do have data that's there. But how it works is he's become the de facto analytics person at their organization. And he's like, hey, I don't know anything.
Tell us how we're doing.
He's like, I'm self-taught. Like he's just the most comfortable person pulling a CSV file out of their HRIS system.
This is why I was questioning this whole data-driven thing, because I'm like, okay, are you like, how many organizations are actually data-driven, or how many say we want to make data-driven decisions, but they don't actually invest in the people to analyze the data in order to have the intelligence, the business intelligence to make data-driven decisions?
I mean, I think that's spot on.
I just like calling people out,
Well, and I think we mentioned in previous episodes that the people that I think have been most successful in their organizations are people that came from the operational side of the business first. So like some of the CPOs that I talked to. You mean
the people, like the HR people that have been most successful?
There were 2 chief people officers that I spoke with in the course of doing some of these interviews. That previously had been either COO or high level executive in like literally the operations side of the business. And so they had a very, very intimate understanding of how does the business work? What are the core metrics of the business? What makes us successful? How do we make money?
What makes the machine actually run?
And I think what's helpful is they understand that like a business has to make money to be sustainable, and that the business also needs people to operate and be sustainable. And so those people that start on the operational side that have that really intimate knowledge of how the business operates, what it needs, the core metrics, how it makes money, et cetera, et cetera. And then they move over to the people side. They're more adept at communicating to the executives.
They speak the language.
Who are primarily over on the operational side of the business, why it matters that these investments in people things actually are made.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, but to your point earlier, a lot of HR folks are kind of put in that position from a purely administrative position, like an EA, for example, where it's just like, hey, you're detail oriented. You could probably handle this. So, like, was that a theme of the survey for you? Were you seeing this sort of, people that can really handle stuff, they can get a lot done, they're detail oriented, right? They got a high capacity for work, but they're really just struggling when it comes to, I don't really know how the bread gets made. I'm not really sure how to speak the operational language. I don't know how to
or
pitch this thing.
It's multifaceted. I think some of them maybe don't care to know. So like some HR people get into that work because they care about people.
Yeah.
And so they have perhaps more empathetic personality.
Right. Which is good, but
it is good.
You really can't get things across the finish line unless you kind of level yourself up, so to speak, to speak the language.
Yeah.
And to convince those that control the budget to allow you to do the things to aid the people that you care about.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes that empathetic mindset lends you to be less calculating.
Yeah.
Right. You're perhaps less likely to, try and quantify value around a human being in the same kind of way.
Ironically, HR people treat humans less like resources than non-HR people.
This is true. and rightly so, I think. And so they are those advocates for culture and for the people and so forth. And so I think really, we kind of describe this in our research as a competence gap. And I hesitate in some ways to say it in that way because it makes it sound like it's an inadequacy. But I think it really is just it's a skills gap for a lot of HR professionals where they simply don't have the experience. Like,
we all have skills.
Hey, how do I take this Excel file and build a story from it? Right. Yeah. Like that just takes some experience.
Well, and as a result, that's become that was your job for a while at Fringe, right? I mean, you really wrote the book internally on how to consultatively sell, right? Meaning, how do we come alongside HR people, not sell them, but actually come alongside them, understand their needs, and help them sell the powers that be to get the budget necessary to do the thing that this HR person already knows is intrinsically the right thing to do, right? Their gut already tells them this is the right thing.
Yeah. So I think there's a dynamic that came out of this that was, around those skill gaps. Like, how do you bridge that? What are some of the needs for the profession on the whole? And so I think, kind of going back to something we said in the last episode was a lot of the people that we spend time around in the community that we kind of operate in primarily tend to be fairly proficient in these areas.
Yeah.
Where when you look at kind of the average company, that's probably less true. But I think you also have this issue at hand, even with big companies, of what do we do with the data that we have? Like, how do we even surface the right insight out of it to drive some kind of action that's meaningful for the business? So I don't know. I'm curious actually if you remember this. So this was like very early on in Fringe, like maybe within the first like 6 months of Fringe.
Probably not going to remember.
We had an advisor. I think you might though. We had an advisor who was the head of total rewards at a large Fortune 100 company.
Okay. Yep.
And she had invited us to come in and talk with some people from her team who helped run people analytics. And I remember sitting in this room with some HR business partners and some people that were head of, people analytics at this huge organization. I mean, they had like teams upon teams upon teams.
Yeah, we were in over our heads, to say the least.
And this is at a point in time where we like barely knew anything about HR. And I remember though, being very surprised because they came in and kind of proudly described to us this predictive model
that
they had created.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was
they're very proud of that.
Yeah, they're like,
I do actually remember.
We have this like predictive model, and like we can identify like employees in different teams, and like when we think they might be leaving, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. It's like, wow, that's super cool. Like, what are you doing about it?
Yeah, what are you doing with that model?
And it was just like crickets. Like they had no idea, and it was like, oh my gosh, like what is the point?
What's the point?
What's the point of having this data?
Yeah.
That
well, I think you're onto something. I'm all about gathering the data, all about analyzing the data, all about making decisions from the data. I think that's a fantastic thing. But I think if we're honest, a lot of people are gathering data not because they're trying to help the organization, but because they're trying to CYA. Mm-hmm. Like they're trying to make decisions that are backed by something, or they're going to make a decision, they're going to have data in place. And if somebody questions their decision later, they have something to point at, and as well as I do, you can make data say whatever the heck you want it to say, right? So whenever there's somebody going, hey, why did you make that decision? That failed. Well, hey, man, the data. Right. We surveyed, this is what they said. What do you want me to do, right? So I think that comes from a place of, I'm gathering and analyzing data from the wrong motivation. I'm just trying to protect myself or to protect my job, as opposed from a perspective of I'm actually trying to find out the truth and make a decision that will aid the company and the people within the company in a significant way.
Well, I think that's true, especially at larger companies. Yeah. So something, we've mentioned Cassandra a number of times. She's our head of people here at Fringe, and we interviewed her as part of this process too, and she said something I thought that was really.
She co-hosted with you.
She did,
yeah. I keep forgetting to mention that.
And she said it's important to understand in many organizations that asking for things is a zero-sum game. Mm. And so for you as the individual professional that's saying, hey, maybe I have some data, I think it's compelling, I'm going to go ask for something. Like what is really going on in that scenario is, am I willing to put my neck out there, right on the chopping block potentially for something with some potential?
Yeah.
And a lot of people just aren't, because it has that zero-sum game feel to it. It's like, if this doesn't pan out, guess what? Like, I'm the one that's taking the fall for that, right?
Right. I mean, I think about our own values at Fringe, like our stated values at Fringe. Like, we're trying to cut through some of that by saying, hey, fail boldly.
Yeah.
Be flawed. Like, make mistakes. And I think you need to encourage employees so much. I even had a conversation today with an employee who I think has some really good ideas about some things that we need to do, but he's afraid to say that because he thinks it will be perceived as, hey, I'm not doing all that well in my job, and I kind of think I want to do a different job, and like it'll be seen as an excuse. But what it really is just an insightful person that sees something that I don't see, that sees a way that we need to go as a company, and a way that we need to market, a way that we need to kind of plan for this new, economic environment that we're in.
Yeah.
And he just needs to say it.
Yeah.
And stick his neck out there and go, you know what? We're going this way. That was a bad decision. We need to go this way.
Right.
That's a terrifying thing to do.
Yeah.
Right. And data is helpful to like back that up and like make an argument and so forth. But I think if we can create a culture in which people, no matter what level of the organization that they're in, they feel the freedom to speak out with the knowledge that they have about where the company needs to go, that's going to be a healthy company.
Yeah. Well, and it's incumbent upon leaders, as you did in this scenario, it sounds like, to actually listen to people who have a point of view. Because, I mean, there's a hubris in thinking that we can see all things, that we're omnipotent.
Just total BS. If you're not at the top of your organization and you're listening to this, and your CEO or somebody like your head of this or your head of that is trying to convince you that they see everything.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
They are lying.
Yeah.
They do not see it.
Yeah.
They're concerned with the exact number of things that you are concerned with because they have about the same brain capacity that you do.
I feel like a good analogy for this might be, which like, I have a little bit different experience because I'm not the CEO at Fringe, but I mean, like I've been around a lot of things. I'm on the board and things like that. But I feel like a good example would be when you became a parent
Yeah.
Especially like as your kids started getting to like toddler and then maybe like 5 or 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And like when you're a kid, you just think, oh my gosh, my parents, they know everything. They got this shit figured out. And then you get to having your kids and you're like, they didn't know a damn thing. They were making all this up as they went. And that's probably what a lot of CEOs are doing, right? I mean, I
still can't believe that. Like at 37, you're 38. I still can't believe that we're the dads.
Oh,
you
right.
know?
Yeah.
I'm like, our kids think we know what we're doing.
Yeah, they're going to be really disappointed.
Like we're making it all up as we go along. Like every day, my kids present me with a new challenge, some new question they've never asked before, or some new way that they're just being weird and doing strange things. And I'm like, there's no playbook.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
Yeah, they're like, what do we do? And you're like, we'll see.
Exactly. I say dad stuff like, we'll see. Yeah. And let me talk to your mom about it.
Do you ever say that to anyone at Fringe? Like, we'll see.
I don't think I do. I really
props.
I really separate.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not daddy here.
I'm proud of you. That's like pretty solid.
But I have the same emotion. I have the same they ask me, like an employee will ask me a question.
Right, and you're
I'm
like filtering.
I don't have a clue what the answer is.
I don't know. Yeah.
You know, but you don't want to admit as a leader that you're clueless.
We'll come up with something.
Yeah, no. So you're just like, let me get back to you. You know, let me socialize. I would never say that because it's horrible.
I was like, when have you ever said that?
Let me socialize that is what people will say.
Yeah.
Or circle the wagons, which is completely the wrong use of that phrase. But
hunker down.
People say it to mean let me socialize or ask others. But circling the wagons was actually a strategy of protecting the people in the middle of the wagons. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, but you're going to get me off on
mixing our metaphors
on etymology. And that's a dangerous thing. We'll talk way too long about that.
So there were a couple of things that I thought were interesting, just even as we tried to articulate our own maybe point of view around data and like what's important.
Yeah.
So like one of the key questions I think that came up for us for companies in general is just, do I have access to good people data? Like period. Just can I get to the data points that are necessary to actually assemble metrics that could tell me something about the business?
And like, what's the right data to even capture or pay attention to?
It's actually far more complicated than you might imagine because you just think like, you just get the data out of the system. Right. Well, the problem is most of the data that companies have on their people lives in multiple systems, even for small companies. Like you look at Fringe, there's probably at least 3 or 4 different systems that all contain what I would say would be like vital people data that you need to make, to arrive at the metrics that are important. So, we're a small company. Take that out to a couple hundred employees, it's even more so. My brother described some of that. He's like, I got to pull data from different places and kind of put it together into these spreadsheets and then build pivot tables and so on and so forth. And then talking to the folks at this Fortune 100 company, they literally call it a data lake because they have massive databases, separate databases with all this different information about employees. And then in order to even access it in a way that they can put the data together to get metrics, they've got to dump it all into this data lake, they call it. And then from the data lake...
All I hear when you say data lake is drowning. That's all I hear. They're drowning in a data lake.
I mean, I think that's actually an apt image and metaphor.
Sorry.
Yeah, because they dump it all in there, and then from that, they've got extra. So like the predictive model they built was from the data that they got into this data lake, and then they had it all connected enough that they could actually extrapolate from that, this model that they built and so forth. But I think that leads to the second point, which is, so one is, do I have access to, I'd actually break this into 2 parts maybe. Do I have access to data? Do I have access to good data?
Yeah.
So is it accurate? Can I work with it?
Right.
And then the next piece of this is, can I glean the insights I need from the data?
Right.
And that's the part that takes a little bit more thinking. Like I have to know something about the business. I have to know maybe a little bit of what I'm looking for even, which requires, putting some thought into strategy around people and what I'm aiming for, right? Because without an aim, how do you even know what to look for?
So I've got to access the data. I've got to question whether or not the data is good.
Yep.
Then I've got to glean the proper insights from the data.
Yep.
And then I have to go sell executives and assuage all their fears of what if the data is not good?
Nice.
What if it doesn't work? Yeah, it was smooth. And what hope does an HR person have, Jason, Mr. Surveyor, interviewer? Like, what hope do they have of doing all of those steps and then convincing an executive that, hey, we need to prioritize our people in this particular way and offer this benefit or offer this software?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I think it's hard.
Yeah.
But I do have some hope and I have a vision, even for what we're trying to do here at Fringe. And so I think there is a challenge with.
Talk about that, actually.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but talk about the vision at Fringe and what we hope to build over the course of years to do some of this. Consolidation is part of it and aggregation, but also like helping the HR person know what they're looking at, know what's important, know what decisions to make, where to put data, and then ultimately kind of delivering that to the powers that be that make decisions.
I think the mistake that's often made is the thinking that every company is so different and so unique that you can't possibly have enough sort of, there's no common denominator across any of it that's going to help you drive action from the insights that you might glean. And so every company is just kind of out there doing it on their own. Independently.
Right.
Like basically taking their data, building these models, trying to gain insights from it.
You're saying that's a mistake.
That's a mistake. Well, it's very difficult.
Right.
Right. Because in order to do that well, you need people that are really great working with the data, that have enough knowledge about people and the business to surface the proper insights. Yeah. And then you have an executive team that believes and an HR team that can communicate to the executive team what those insights and actions are that they should be taking, and then they're going to act upon them. Right. And so there's a lot of things that have to go really, really well in that whole thing that is just, I think, extremely difficult. And so what I've been kind of putting forth when we were having some of these interviews is like, well, what is technology best served to do? Is best served in the cases where there's enough of a commonality across the board that you can leverage the scalability of a tool
of the sameness
to drive action across a large number of users, let's say. And so one of the things that I think actually is true and that we've talked about is, every company is unique. It's true.
Yeah.
Every company has unique culture.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But I describe the culture more as like flavors of ice cream, right? It's all ice cream,
right?
But it's just different flavors.
In other words, it's all people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what have we been talking about? Yeah. Well, people are different.
Yeah.
But we believe at Fringe anyways, and I think this is true, that people have fundamental intrinsic needs.
Yeah.
Right. And in the last episode or 2 episodes ago, we talked about,
for the most part, common.
Right. And I mean, you could boil them down to like really simple things like people want to belong, they want to have purpose, or people have a need for unmerited, unconditional acceptance and also conditional unmerited reward, right? There's these kind of really fundamental principles about what it means to be a human and to live a holistic and fulfilling life.
And those things are unchanged regardless of what organization you're a part of.
And so I believe, and I have a vision for what we're trying to do here at Fringe that says we can surface those things and we can provide those insights along with actions delivered through technology that help optimize the employee experience.
Yes.
Because human beings are different, but they're similar enough in terms of what they need.
Yes.
That you can create the environment in such a way and surface these insights in such a way that, it's going to be scalable across a large number of organizations.
I mean, I don't know if you remember, we had a meeting earlier with our co-founder, Isaiah, and I just went off about this very thing, that we have all of this insight. We have all of this data from years and years and years of working with Fringe users and what their behaviors are and what their sentiment is about using our platform. And yet we have a partner who wants to, get into business with us in a deeper way, and they want to roll this thing out to all of their users. And what do they want to do first? They want to test the data. Right. They want to get a small subset of their users, which are somehow fundamentally different than our users, and to see if they feel the same way about our platform that all of these other people do. And it's maddening. Yeah. Because I'm like, we already have the data.
Yeah, you just want to grab people and be like, hey,
aren't that different.
Do you have human beings that work at your company?
Sorry. Were you working with somebody besides humans? Because if it's humans, we have that data already. We could just surface that and tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah. So I think then the question in my mind becomes like, hey, I think there's sort of these universal needs that humans have,
which is so important that HR people understand that. And I think that that's maybe the superpower that's untapped. Yeah. It's like, hey, maybe you're not the greatest data analyst that ever lived, right? But if you understand people and you can communicate how people work, sorry to use the title of our podcast in my argument here.
Perfect.
But if you can communicate how people work to the executives that control the budget, right? And they can see at least the what is the word I'm looking for? Like the obvious intuitive part, the gut side of it, right? Then maybe you don't have to make a perfect data presentation.
Right.
If you can get across that human side of just like, hey, people like to be recognized for their achievement, right?
Right.
Don't you? Right?
No,
of course not.
Don't be ridiculous.
Right?
Yeah, next time that raise comes up, just don't worry about
give it to somebody else, like I think there's common ground even before the data gets presented of just like, hey, and I think again, like usually HR people are people, and they like have a good point of view of how people work, and like have insights, and so I think you can
they have compassion at least,
compassion, empathy. They're paying attention, So I think there's something there to sort of set as a foundation to stack the data upon.
So that's what I hope we're able to do.
I love it. I love that you have a vision. We are well over our allotted time. We can talk as long as we want, right? We can go Joe Rogan and go 3 hours. But
it's true.
We also have families to get home to. So thank you, Jason, for your insights today. Thank you all for listening to How People Work. Before we go, Jason, tell us if you have one locked and loaded, the next episode's word of the day. You could just make one up. It's fine, on the fly. Just anything you like. He doesn't have one ready. That's why
I don't have one ready.
That's what this is right now.
Oh, man. Yeah, you got me like just totally unprepared. What are we going to go with? Pungent.
Pungent. Why? That's a nice pull out of nowhere.
I don't know how that popped into my head.
That's pretty good. Yeah. All right. Yeah, and one that I might have to Google again. Well, thank you again for listening to How People Work. Again, this is Jordan Peace with my co-host. I'm also a co-host, Jason Murray, and we will see you next time.